Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. So welcome to Chatham House and welcome to the webinar Net Zero by 2050, UK and Japan's effort to address climate change. I'm Anna Yang. I'll be your host and the chair for the discussion today. So the webinar today is really for us to understand and hear from our two speakers the challenge of implementation ahead of COP26. So UK and Japan have demonstrated leadership in announcing that they will aim to reach net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. I think the biggest challenge that we all face is how do we implement, and then how do we align policy signals, policy packages with investment decisions, and then how can business and non-state actors act on this. So in this super year, because we have two COPs, right? We have the biodiversity COP incoming, we have COP26. This is what can we learn, and what are the challenges that these two countries are facing ahead? So how might UK, Japan aim to reach net zero? And then how do we align 2030 targets to 2050? How can UK and Japan drive these global transformation, and how does that align to international cooperation and multilateral cooperation? So this event is held in partnership with the Embassy of Japan in the UK and the Japan House in London, and it is on record. We have Michael Hulihan, the Director General of Japan House, to give us a welcome address. And then we'll have Mr. Junichiro Otaka, he's the Director of Climate Change Division from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan, to be the first to give his remark. And Peter Betts, he's an Associate Fellow with Chatham House with our Energy and Environment Program. So with that, I'll hand over to Michael.
Hey, thank you, Anna, and thank you to everyone for joining us at Japan House London online this afternoon. This is the fourth and sadly final webinar in the current series of events hosted and moderated by Chatham House, and of course held in partnership with the Embassy of Japan in the UK and Japan House London. Japan House has been privileged to host what has been a very stimulating series of presentations, embracing a pretty varied range of international topics, ranging across the challenges of aging societies, to trade, to security, and also to COVID. Just by way of introduction to those of you who do not know about Japan House, it's located on Kensington High Street in London. It's arranged across 3 floors, and it presents visitors with an opportunity to discover, to learn about, and to engage with Japan. It offers a range of varied and authentic cultural experiences, such as exhibitions, events, workshops, a library, a shop, travel advice, and gastronomy. And it seeks to build a bridge of deeper understanding between and create an enduring legacy of relationships between the UK and Japan. As we see today, Japan House is also a forum for the exchange of ideas, new developments, and conversations between the two nations across a wide range of important topics. This is all part of a vigorous online presence that over the past year has seen over 30 Japan House online events. Actually, it's nearer 40 now, ranging across manga and craft workshops, live sake brewery visits, through to a 3D virtual exhibition tour. So please check out our website for events during lockdown. Speaking of which, we're very much looking forward to getting back to business in the real world, with the shop hopefully reopening on the 12th of April, subject to the prevailing restrictions. On the 17th of May, we hope to reopen our exhibition program with a brand new exhibition exploring the innovative work of Japanese textile designer Suda Reiko, who is renowned for pushing the boundaries of textile production and also championing new methods of sustainable manufacturing. Also starting this year, Japan House will be focusing a number of its key activities on exploring Japan's response to the wide-ranging objectives set out in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with their emphasis on eradicating poverty and realizing a sustainable world. Following the adoption of these goals in 2015, Japan moved quite quickly to establish a broad-based, whole-of-society approach to implementing the SDGs, centered around the key priority areas of people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnerships. Specific actions have included prime ministerial leadership, Society 5.0, strategic use of the presidency of G7 and G20, and the hosting of Expo 2025 in Osaka to focus on SDGs. Many Japanese companies have also mobilized around these initiatives in their future business plans. In terms of the next generation, sustainable development has been introduced into the school curriculum. Japan is clearly already working at a local and global level. G13, obviously, of the UN Sustainable Development Goals specifically seeks to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. I suppose after a year of more of focusing upon COVID-19, it's very gratifying that today we are refocusing our attention onto these issues, which are so crucial to the future of the planet. So I'm very much looking forward to this particular discussion. So if I can hand back to Anna and our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Otaka, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Otaka Junichiro, the Director for the Climate Change in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. And I would like to thank you for inviting me to this event. And I'd like to thank the organizers, members of Chatham House and Japan House, which has made this very meaningful event possible. Of course, it would always have been a great pleasure for me to be present to the UK myself, face to face, as I have personally studied in the UK 1 year in Scotland and 1 year in England. I have a great affiliation to the UK, and but given the current restrictions due to COVID-19, thanks to the technological advance, we can hold the event in this way, which is still very, very meaningful. And at the outset, I would really like to re-emphasize how timely this event is being held, because this year is, so to say, a year of climate, as there will be very important event coming up. This very day, UK government is hosting a ministerial dialogue regarding the climate and development, in which our parliamentary minister, Uto, has participated. And I should state that, of course, President Chalmers and Special Envoy Kerry and many other international participants are taking place in this web-based event, which I think is giving great impetus to the whole of the climate agenda. So apart from today's event, there will be many other important events coming up. Climate Leaders Summit is being hosted by the US in 22nd of April. There will be a G7 summit coming up in June, again being hosted by the UK. And finally, there will be a COP26, which is going to take place in Glasgow. And before that, we have many other UN General Assembly, other important events coming up, which continues to bring attention to this very important issue of climate change. Now, against this background of the year of climate, UK is very keen to move forward with this agenda. And as for Japan, we are really taking great importance to the tackling this very important agenda. So taking this opportunity, I would like to just give a broad overview of what Japan's effort is up to I'll try to make my presentation as short as possible and leave the session to the Q&A, because I think the more interactive the presentation or this is, the more interesting, hopefully, it will be. So Japan has announced the net zero by the Prime Minister Suga on October of last year. And this, as for Japan, is a great development. Now, so if you look at the slide, against this background of this announcement of net zero, Japan has brought forward the green growth strategy, which was announced in Christmas last year. It constitutes of 14 growth sectors. It includes energy, transport, manufacturing, and home and office. So this includes renewable energy like offshore wind power, fuel ammonia, and hydrogen. And also, as for transport and manufacturing, mobility, battery, semiconductor, ICT, amongst others. And I should also stress that Japan has been steadily decreasing GHG emissions since 2013, falling to a record low since fiscal year 1990 in 2019. And Japan is also providing bilateral and regional support on climate change in the amount of $12.6 billion US, which is actually the part of the commitment of the 1.3 trillion yen of annual amount, which was announced in 2015. And as for the tool of the assistance, the All in Japan support system for decarbonization, as well as Clean Energy Future Initiative for ASEAN, amongst other policy tools, are being implemented to assist the developing countries which are in need of tackling the climate change. Now, to the final point, why is it so important for Japan and UK to collaborate in this? I think it should be looked in a broader context of not just being limited to the importance of climate change, tackling the climate change, which is already, so to say, a self-evident agenda. It is because we share a lot of policy priorities in common, and also we have shared values which we have in common. So amongst so many things that we have together, not only in foreign policy, the way of society, the geographical situation, I think there's a meaningfulness for both countries to come together to tackle this global issue. I think it's so very meaningful as a part of a very close relations between our two countries to collaborate, not just bilaterally, but in assisting other countries as well, and also perhaps persuading other countries to take actions to move our agendas forward. I have a lot more to say, but I'd like to leave it up to questions and, as well as exchanges with participants to really have a lot more to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Otaka. Peter, over to you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna. And it's delighted to be here. And thanks to Mr. Otaka, very interesting presentation. So I don't have a glossy slide pack. So I'm going to just offer some remarks on two of the questions. Firstly, a little bit about some of what the UK is doing and some of the challenges, and then something about the more international dimension and what needs to be done in the run up to Glasgow. I should emphasize I'm speaking in a personal capacity, not in any of the other various hats that I currently wear. I'm happy to speak on with my Chatham House hat, but not any of the others. So on the UK, I would say, domestically, I would say there's a lot to celebrate, but there are also some big challenges going forward. So what should we celebrate? I think the UK has a challenging net zero goal. It's all greenhouse gases by 2050 with a strong presumption against offsets. We have an NDC, a target for emissions reductions in 2030 of 68% reduction. And the Climate Change Committee has just recommended a 78% reduction for essentially for 2035. I think, it's generally recognized the UK's record on cutting emissions is the best in the G7 since 1990, whilst growing our economy. And I think we also benefit from very strong architecture, the Climate Change Committee, which I also advise, setting independent, making recommendations to government. And we've also benefited from political consensus broadly in the UK about acting. So I think all of those are strong features. I think there are now some big challenges. So firstly, the UK is not on track for its fourth and fifth carbon budgets. It's essentially its mid-2020s and 2030 targets. So I know the government is aware it's going to need some more policies. I think the second thing I would say is that if you look at what's been achieved, it is very significant, but most of the reduction that's been achieved has been either in power or in decarbonising industry, which are big challenges, but they're mostly invisible to the public. As it were, you just see the electricity coming out of your plug. You don't see the real changes. I think that's going to continue. So the Climate Change Committee would see power being completely decarbonised by 2035. But the really big challenges in the 2020s are going to be things like heat. I think it's something like 27 million households in the UK mostly have gas boilers in their homes. So there's going to have to be a program for new boilers, to be for new heating systems to be low carbon, and then progressively for existing boilers to be changed. Cars, so electric. The government has set a target of 2030, after which no internal combustion engine cars can be sold. These are going to be things that the public will notice. And it's going to need very good policy design, very good communication, and a sense that the transition is being handled fairly and justly. In the very long term, 2050, I think you can say some things with some confidence. So, I think we are going to need much more electrification. Climate Change Committee talks about doubling or tripling of electricity demand. But there are other things that are less certain. So we don't know how much behavioral change there'll be. We don't know how much technology change there's going to be. What is interesting is that, the climate change analysis now estimates the same cost for net zero in 2050 as it previously did for an 80% reduction by 2050. So the estimated costs keep coming down. So the Climate Change Committee estimates that the cost of getting to net zero will be less than 1% of GDP per year, which is clearly a significant sum, but it's less than 1%. And that doesn't factor in positive externalities, like better air quality and so on. So that's the UK. I mean, we certainly haven't got everything right. And, I'm sure there's much that we could work with on Japan. It's great that Japan now have a net zero goal as well. It's massive, as Mr. Taka said, shared values, very close friends. And there's massive innovation capability and technical capability in Japan. I'm sure there's a lot of scope for us to work together. In terms of the international agenda, I guess for the next year or so, the UK sort of wears a particular hat as COP presidency. So we're neutral and we have to work with everybody, including Japan, but everybody. You know, broadly speaking, I would say there are 4 sets of things the UK as presidency needs to do over the next year. Firstly, they need to get much stronger nationally determined contributions, targets from all the countries. Secondly, they need to make very substantial progress on finance and adaptation, developing country priorities and issues like that. Thirdly, there's a whole raft of real economy and sectoral initiatives that the UK is rightly trying to galvanize. And fourth, there's a negotiated agenda, some items that have to be negotiated in the COP. So in light of that, what does the sort of UK as the presidency need from Japan? So I guess the UK wants ambitious NDCs from all. I think the prospects for getting ambition are much better than they were, say, 6 months ago. We've got a much more, a different US president, US administration. I think the net zero announcements by China, as well as Japan and Korea, do really change the weather, as it were. I also think that you could have expected COVID to have pushed climate off the priority of politicians globally, and actually that hasn't happened, and more of a focus on these global public goods, these global problems is my sense. So we do hope to see, I'm sure the UK, I can't speak for the UK, but I'm sure that civil society, and I'm sure the UK would hope to see a very ambitious NDC from Japan in line with its net zero goal. I have seen the number of 50% often quoted as a number people would like to see. I know its existing target is a 26% reduction on 2013. Second thing, I guess, that UK, I'm sure, would like to see is more climate finance. So it looks to me likely that the developed countries will miss their collective target to mobilize $100 billion by 2020 or from 2020. So I think the UK has doubled its climate finance. Regrettably, it's cut its overall ODA, but it's doubled its climate finance. So I think the UK will be hopeful that Japan will also do so, and at very least significantly increased its climate finance along with other donors, and also commit more to adaptation. That's a big concern of developing countries. Not enough goes on adaptation. I think there's also scope to do stuff on finance outside of the formal negotiations. So there's increasing debate about, for example, an increased issuance of special drawing rights by the IMF. I think that it'd be great if Japan could get behind that along with others. I'm not sure where Japan is, so maybe they already are. Forgive me if they already are. So, and there's other issues like that, reform of the multilateral development banks, embedding climate in the role of the IMF, things like that. Finally, on sectoral initiatives, I would just pick out 3 where it would be great if Japan could, play a leading role. The first is coal. So I think the UK and others will be hoping that developed countries commit to end new coal, phase out existing coal, and end international coal financing. China is by far the biggest funder of international coal, but Japan and Korea are next. So, a step by Japan and Korea would be very significant and strong signal. Secondly, I know there's a strong appetite to set end dates for sales of internal combustion engines and to work with countries and manufacturers to do that. UK has a target for that of 2030, as I mentioned. So I think there will be a keenness for Japan to come on board such a coalition. And thirdly, really important is this whole area of risk disclosure, finance, mandatory risk disclosure. And I think there is growing pressure bottom up from businesses to set, not only to set net zero goals, but to really be transparent about their risks, the risks around climate, but also to really embed those risks, an assessment of those risks in investments and decision making. I think there's going to be strong pressure to do this top down as well through governments and central banks and regulators to really require this kind of risk disclosure and essentially and ultimately stress testing of companies' balance sheets against these risks. So that's another third area where I think it would be great if Japan could, show leadership along with, as it has on other areas. So certainly not intending to preach to Japan as the presidency. I'm sure the UK will be making these messages to all friends and partners around the world. But I hope that's a good starter for 10 to get the debate going, Anna.
Thank you, Pete. So before I open to the Q&A, I thought that we should use this opportunity to, have a dialogue among ourselves. And I think Mr. Otaka and Pete, you both sort of set out that, from what I hear in terms of our collective implementation challenge, right, which is, I think it's absolutely great that UK, Japan has set the commitment of achieving net zero. But I think the biggest challenge is like how we implement it, what do we do from now until 2050? And then what are all the moving parts that need to be all the ducks that need to be lined up, right? Pete, you just set that out between finance and then the international architecture, the policy packages, all of that. So, how should we start in terms of prioritization as well? And also, how do we manage this sort of international and domestic agenda?
I can say something at the beginning. I said something at the beginning already about how I thought the UK would approach this. It is approaching it. So I think most economies looking at this tend to start with power. That's where the really big, where lots of the really big emissions are, and where there are cost-effective alternatives in place already. Renewables are cheaper than coal in many parts of the world now. So I think decarbonising power tends to be first. I think increasingly we're seeing electric vehicles are going to be cheaper than internal combustion engines, even on purchase price, not just on whole life costs. I think that tends to be next. I think heat is a big challenge, and I think mass electrification tends to be a solution that most economies look at. And then the issues that are tricky are industry, where you've essentially got the choice between CCUS or electrification, or I know Japan is strong in this area, hydrogen. These are the sorts of options. Agriculture tends to be one of the harder issues, and that will tend to come later, and aviation perhaps a third. But we can't leave these issues until the 2040s. We have to start moving on them now. And I do think there's definitely scope for the right kind of international conversations, sort of learning from each other, because there is no route map for this, and we will certainly learn as we go and adjust direction as we go.
Thank you, Pete. Mr. Taka.
Yes, thank you. As has been correctly noted by Mr. Watson, I think it's a question, as well as Anna-san, it's a question of whole of the transformation of a society. So it's a very big question, and I think learning from each other's experience is very important. And because all of the countries and all of the individuals are in different situations, probably the pathway is not the same, but yet we can learn from each other and do the best we can, and also try to seek how we can do better. So amongst the topics which were raised on the opening remarks, I would like to touch on some of the topics. First, on the NDCs. I am very impressed with the UK's ambitious NDCs, 68%. As for Japan, we are looking into the 2030 reduction target, which is just 9 years from now. It's a short-term goal, relatively. And we need to look at it from the basis that we need to have the figure based on evidence. And as together, it needs to be in line with the long-term goal. So Japan, like the UK, has the net zero target for 2050. So it needs to be in line with that. And also it needs to be based on concrete policy. We have announced already that we will announce the target decide the target before the timing of the COP26. And currently we are accelerating our effort, and we are thinking to see what is the best timing that we can announce to bring about the robust answer to the question posed, how to show to the world that we are making our efforts towards the net zero in line with our already announced goal. That's number one. And second point on the let's say the fossil fuels, particularly coal. We are also very interested to learn from the experiences of others, but we are also looking to see the overall situation. Last year, Japan has announced its policy on the infrastructure development. And we have announced a policy that we will not export coal power plants unless the recipient country requests the such export as the necessary transition to the decarbonized society. And we have limited to a very exceptional high efficiency coal-fired power plants. Now, of course, there are various energy situation amongst the developing countries. We need to look at them separately, but also we are aware of the overall necessity to achieve the decarbonized society. And also we are aware of the international discussions. The whole of government policy has continued to state on the constant review, and we will continue to do so in the future. But let me stress that we have announced such a drastic change of policy last year, which was unprecedented. Like many of the other policies which was announced with regards to the climate, like the green growth strategy I just explained, I think many of the Japanese people in themselves are quite surprised to see such big shift in the whole of policies, as well as the whole of environment, not only government, but business sectors as well. And coming to the issue of finance, I should stress the point which was not stated as of now, which is the need to mobilize the private finance as well as the public finance. I think it's very important for developing countries to address the issue to scale up the finance itself as a public entity as a whole. In OECD report, as of 2018, we are still about 80% close to the $100 billion target, which was agreed in 2015. But as a part of such effort, we should mobilize the private finance, which is very important as part of the finance agenda. And I agree completely on the importance of adaptation. As of Japan, half of the Japan's grant aid is placed on adaptation, and we will continue to attach importance to the assistance in this area. And as for the risk disclosure of private entities, Japanese companies are very keen on this agenda. And that's why, with regard to the TCFD initiative, Japanese companies, I think there are over 300 companies, which is the largest number in the world, to have the disclosure efforts. And we would like to encourage other countries to do so. And it's very important that this becomes a global trend, because it's overall really an international issue, not just a domestic one country issue. So, but coming back to the basics, the transformation of whole of the realms of society is needed, as well as the international relations which are at stake. The Japan and UK, as we have agreed at the outset, can collaborate. But even if Japan and UK achieve net zero at a speedy pace, we need to encourage others to do so as well. Because if we don't do so, including the developing countries, and also countries which have capacity to do so, even in countries which are categorized as developing countries in the UNFCCC, which is the agreement in the 1990s, we have countries which have the potential, both finance and also as a government, to proceed in their own efforts in a speedy pace to achieve the decarbonization, and even assist others. So with this collective global effort, we can come closer to net zero in a speedy manner as possible. So I think Japan and UK can collaborate on this agenda as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I will now, we have 22 questions, which I think, and I was just reading through them in terms of, and I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe just buckle them around, cluster them around a couple of questions. And then, so there are a group of questions around sort of a clearer sort of targets on how the 2050 goal is going to be achieved for Japan, you know, there, and then linked to that is, some of them is linked to the energy mix. What is the role of, you know, renewable? Some of them talk about whether nuclear is part of it, whether it's not part of it. So there is a bucket of questions around there. I think there's another bucket of questions, which I thought was interesting, around sort of the built environments, the heating, Peter, you mentioned, but also, I mean, both UK and Japan has already quite a large established building stock. But if they're going to renew some of these building stocks, also how do we, that is actually my evolved question, how do we incorporate the whole embodied carbon discussion as well, beyond the energy efficiency and the heating? And there are questions around what are the priority sort of sectoral action plans that you see, you know, Pete sort of set out some of them for the UK, but it would be good to hear from Japan, like how some of the sectoral initiative can sort of be rolled out.
Well, maybe just a short answer to that. With the renewable energy, Japan, like many other countries perhaps, has already set a policy to mainstream the renewable energy. And we have put up a robust plan to move forward with renewable energy initiatives such as next generation solar power and offshore wind power as well. But we need technological innovation as well, because electricity as of now cannot be stocked fully, and we will need the battery technologies ongoing. And that's why Japan has moved forward to create the fund amounting to 2 trillion yen in order to inject the research and innovation efforts to promote such technological innovation. Of course, that's only part of the solution. And the action plan for the at the community level is very important. And based on this principle, Japan is ongoing, moving forward with the effort of strong collaboration with central and local government. They are meeting in a regular manner, and at the ministerial level, there's a strong leadership towards that. And with the sharing of a good example, best practices of the communities, respective communities, we hope to bring about, so to say, a domino effect to create the overall trend for the domestic decarbonization and even global global decarbonization. We have held recently the cities, the subnationals forum, to inviting world cities, particularly Asian cities, to share best practices on their decarbonization efforts. So that's only very small part of large number of efforts that Japan's taking. And I'll be very delighted to hear the UK's efforts as well, and how we can learn from each other and proceed respectively. Thank you. So over to you.
Thank you. Pete, please.
Thanks very much. And 4 points in relation, in response to what you said, Anna, what Mr. Otaka said, and the questions. So the first point is this sort of question about renewables or nuclear. I mean, my view is, as Mr. Otaka said, that, renewables are improving all the time. The load factors from offshore wind are much higher than, 50% even or more than we've seen in other renewable technologies. Batteries are coming down as we join up grids. I think the costs and the practicalities are all getting much better. I don't have any ideological issues with nuclear or for that matter CCUS. It's a question of what combination of these technologies countries use in order to achieve their the objective of decarbonizing. I'm not. I mean, clearly there are issues around public opinion in Japan, which Mr. Otaka will know much more about than I do in relation to nuclear. In the UK, I'm not against nuclear. I mean, the issue has been price. It's just been much costlier than and much slower to build than has renewables. But I don't have a theological position, as it were. Second point is the points, the very fair points in the chat about the UK's performance on things like buildings. I agree. I think that the UK has a long way to go on buildings, on heat, on industrial emissions, and so on. And there's definitely a need for more policy in this space. And I hope we'll see that soon. Thirdly, on what Mr. Otaka said about other countries contributing, including so-called developing countries, I totally agree. I mean, China matters more than anybody else in this space. Its emissions are bigger than the US, the EU, and Japan put together. So, we definitely need an ambitious commitment for 2030 from China, as from other emerging economies and undeveloped countries and so on. I mean, on what he said about extending the range of donors, I have some sympathy, strong sympathy for that, for the future finance goal. I think we should be looking to extend the range of donors, including rich countries who are classified as developing. But I think we have an existing commitment as countries currently defined as developed to deliver or to mobilize 100 billion. I think we have to show that we've met that. finally, Anna, just your point on embedded carbon at the end, this very sensitive issue, and we're seeing now the European Union start to move forward on carbon border adjustment mechanisms, essentially tariffs for embedded carbon. Personally, I think there is logic in that, but it is a very sensitive issue, particularly with China and India, but even with the US, it seems, even though if the US had a carbon tax domestically, they probably apply CBAMs themselves. But anyway, it is a very sensitive issue. I think that the European Union gets, well, I know they understand it very well. And, they are, I think, seeking to engage, in a private and different, context with China and others to try to see whether an understanding can be reached. Personally, I feel it could be de-dramatized on both sides. So on, actually on the European side, or the cost of embedded carbon is really quite small. Lower labor cost is a much bigger factor in why manufacturing is leaving developed countries, for example. It's a very low cost. On the other hand, where are we going to start? Where are Europe going to start with carbon border adjustment mechanisms? It's things like steel and cement. I mean, that's not where China sees its big future. It's moving up the value chain. So it doesn't really affect them as it's a sort of, I think Bernice was saying this the other day, it's a sort of emotional reaction which one doesn't normally associate with the Chinese leadership, who are usually very rational and considered. So I don't see why. I think it could be de-traumatized, and we could find a way through that.
Thank you, Pete. No, really good point about border tax adjustment gets people very excited. Either way, there's a group of questions around technological innovation, and then we both talked about it. I mean, you both talked about it. There are questions about what are the innovations that need to be sort of prioritized. What can UK and Japan in terms of demonstration of leadership there? And I also think that in terms of innovation, we can think of like what kind of technology that we have today that can be sort of diffused faster to enable that transition, and what are sort of the new kind of technology which is more in the future but then has a role of disrupting. But I think there is this interplay between the types of innovation that we talk about.
I can give some thoughts. I'm definitely not an expert on innovation. I can give a few sort of opinionated remarks. Mr. Ataka can feel free to tell me I'm completely wrong. So, I mean, I think that innovation is clearly a good thing, and we should promote it. I think that in international attempts to coordinate innovation have really struggled. Because countries tend to be quite reluctant to share their intellectual property and know-how, and politicians are often very attracted to innovation because it seems like a way of solving the problem without hard political choices. But let's certainly drive innovation, and let's try and get cooperation. But it has been hard in the past. A second point I would make is that we do actually have a lot of the technologies, as you were hinting in your question, Anna. It's not about cutting edge research. It's about bringing down the costs of these technologies through deployment and piloting and so on. And things like batteries are falling in price dramatically, but they need to come down more. CCUS, we have the technology. It's just that no one wants to invest the money to deploy it to bring the costs down. Direct air capture could, I suppose, again, we have the technology, but if we could develop mechanisms for cheap direct air capture of carbon from the atmosphere, that would be very, very significant. So, but others will be much more expert than I on whether there are particular opportunities for innovation that we should prioritize.
Thank you, Pete. Mr. Taka?
Yes, thank you. As for innovation, I think it is true that it is in short term not a magic wand, but it's absolutely necessary in order to bring the whole issue forward. And if we look at what's happening present, without the innovation, we would not have achieved what we have achieved now. That's for sure. The reduction achieved by the UK, the EU, Japan, and other countries have been achieved by technological innovation and advancement, including the improvement of electric grid system, the wind power, the advancement of wind power technologies, and also introduction of solar powered technologies. 10 or 20 years ago, the renewable energies were much more expensive, much difficult to be introduced, but there are more and more powers, wind power, solar power, and other kinds of renewable energy, which are being taking place. And if we look at the future, the cost, for sure, is the very difficult agenda at the moment. That's for sure. And CCUS is not yet practical for business as of now. But I don't think we should stop now. We should continue our efforts, how we can really bring it practical to the society to be applied, because that's a very important key to the solution of the issue. And I forgot to mention one point about mobility, because there was the issue of electric vehicles, which were mentioned previously. I should touch upon this is a very key issue in the advancement of decarbonization. And European countries and some states of the United States, perhaps more in the future at the national level, other parts are moving quickly towards electric powered vehicles. So Japan has announced its policy from end of last year to beginning of this year to change all of the target, to change all of the small car vehicle newly sold to be equipped with electric power. So that's a drastic change. All of such change is being taking place in Europe, in Japan, in other continents. So it's changing a very big, bringing about transformation to the various sectors of the society. So how we proceed with that smoothly for the well-being of the people themselves, of the whole society, is the key. And we should learn from each other in how we proceed, what challenges we face, and how best we could tackle such issue, because it's a very difficult issue for all of us, and we can learn from each other.
Thank you. We're coming sort of towards the end of the, and I think just building on what Pete, you alluded to, right? The cost of deployment or the cost of just making it economically feasible. And this is where the government policy packages, including fiscal policies and all sorts of different kind of policies, can send signals or can contribute to sort of reducing the cost of innovation. So I wanted maybe to use this last couple of minutes to talk about your thoughts on what needs to happen in terms of including microeconomic policy packages that, you know, UK or Japan can think about that can enable well, reducing the cost of innovation so that you have different kind of technology that will enable that transition. Big question again, but for me, that's a bit of a catch-all to sort of deal with some of the finance question, but also this interplay between finance and policy.
A very big question to answer in a short time, but what I can say is that this cannot be achieved by a simple government policy alone. It needs an involvement of various sectors in the society, public sector, private sector, all of society. So as for Japanese policy, we have put forward the notion of the virtuous cycle of the economy and the environment. So basically, previously has been thought that the environment policy is sort of something which hinders the economic growth. But recently, there's a trend which is more prevalent, not only in Japan, but on other countries as well, that if we move forward with the environment policy, that would ignite the positive economic growth. It will cultivate more demand as we transform to a greener society, the more sustainable society, and it will bring about more prosperous world. That's the idea which is becoming more and more popular. And it's important for us to demonstrate that such notion is indeed feasible, possible, and something that bears fruit. Yeah, I'd like to hear your views as well.
Thank you, Mr. Otaka. Pete.
Thanks for Mr. Otaka. So, I mean, others will be more expert than me. Let me give you three suggestions or thoughts. The first one is I do think that very loud, clear signals. This is not so much a microeconomic policy, but loud signals of government intent are powerful. So I do think signals that government are going to ban, so new internal combustion engines by a date is a very strong signal to business, and I think that has been effective over time. Second thing is, I certainly from my experience, I used to be in charge of spending a lot of UK climate finance in developing countries, and often renewable energy was cheaper than fossil fuels, but it was very, very capital intensive at the beginning. So it was very sensitive to the cost of capital and to the enabling environment, to the wider environment. The investor needed confidence they were going to get their money back. So building the right conditions for investors in key emerging economies that they know if they invest in renewable energy, they'll get their money back over the years, I think is a really key signal. I think if you look at some of the challenges in the UK, they're not really research challenges as I think of them. They're really tricky, wicked problems of, market failures around, buildings. How do you persuade people to make their homes energy efficient, even when it's in their economic interest to do so? And, there's a long line of, failed policies to do that. So innovative policy is actually quite important, and where we could learn from each other. Or again, with heat, if you're getting people to change their boilers, that is an expense, but it's also a massive disruption, and finding ways of, taking people with you on that journey feel like big priorities. I'm sure there is. I completely agree with Mr. Tucker that innovation is we should drive it, and there will, I'm sure, be inventions we've never even thought of yet that will help us get there, and we should definitely promote that. But we need kind of deployment support as well, and pilots and innovative policy as well. We need all those things.
Thank you, and I think I mean, moving, like Mr. Otaka said, right, moving to a world that is carbon neutral, and then it also is fair to everyone, is what we all aim to. I think the question is like, how do we get from here to there? And then how do you combine policy, technology, finance? But I think there is, one thing that you alluded to, Pete, is like, how do you make people change? Because ultimately, greenhouse gas emission is a byproduct of how we choose to live, right? How we consume energy, how we live in our buildings. And then how does that trickle to individual choices and decision is like one of the biggest challenges that we have, other than a bunch of that we have ahead of us. Anyway, I'll just leave that for, I mean, you know this, but just for the audience to kind of reflect, because I think this is, how do we move from, we have moved from technological discussion to political discussion, and the next stage at some point is going to be a cultural and behavioral change. Complicated, but hey. So thank you so much. And to the audiences, I'm sorry I didn't manage to answer all of your questions. I tried to sort of, we didn't try to, but we tried to keep it quite broad and lively, and then to sort of, to make sure that everyone understands that it's exciting that we have this ahead of us, but it is going to be a bumpy road. And so thank you, Mr. Otaka, and thank you, Pete, for your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.